We start this week with the gathering of the world's largest advanced economies for the G7 summit. At the top of the agenda for the event was crude oil, a commodity the world needs, but that's increasingly in short supply. For months now, leaders have been putting pressure on oil exporters to pump more fuel out of the ground. They want other suppliers to offset the reduction in shipments from Russia, which have been sanctioned by the West. But as French President Emmanuel Macron whispered to his American counterpart Joe Biden, an exchange picked up by cameras nearby, major producers may not have much supply to spare.
The Commission called and so I call for increasing the production by new rates. So I got him, he told me two things. One, I'm at the maximum. What he claimed, and he told me this is my prepaid commitment. Second, he told me, according to us, that the Saudis can increase a little bit, but 150 or a little bit more, and they don't have huge capacities at this stage, before 6 months' time.
So pumps in the Emirates are already running at full capacity, and Saudi Arabia says extra barrels won't come till later in the year. But what about the rest of the global oil cartel, OPEC, and its allies? It doesn't look like nations thirsty for crude will have much luck with them either. Well, this week, the expanded oil producers cartel OPEC Plus announced it would stay the course with its production policy and hike output by 648,000 barrels of crude a day in July and August. But there's been a disconnect between what the group has promised on paper and the actual volumes it's added to markets. For the month of May, the group's production was 2.7 million barrels a day below its collective target. And since 2020, when OPEC first teamed up with allies led by Russia, output has been more than 500 million barrels below expectations. Han Tan from Xinity Group in Abu Dhabi tells us why the group is struggling.
So I think what we're seeing now are the results of years of underinvestment and also more recently supply disruptions due to political unrest for the likes of Libya, for example, right? And with the resilience, on the other hand, in the global demand side, it's caught suppliers off guard. So all that's being laid bare in the markets right now, hence the elevated oil prices, while noting the challenges that OPEC Plus faces in meeting its collective output targets.
Speaking of Libya, the political crisis there has frozen much of its oil production. The North African nation is currently divided between two competing leaders. The Eastern-based parliament appointed Fathi Bashagha as Prime Minister in March, but his rival in the capital, Tripoli, Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh, claims he holds true legitimacy and has refused to cede control of the government. Tribal groups supporting Bashagha shut down oil facilities in April to pressure Dbeibeh to step down. As a result, the country's crude output has fallen to around 200,000 barrels a day, from more than 1 million barrels before the crisis. Outside observers are eager to see the matter resolved as soon as possible.
Right now, the oil blockade is extremely damaging to Libya's economy, to the Libyan citizens at a time of electricity shortages. Libya's oil infrastructure is at risk because of the blockade. And those who are promoting the oil blockade should think long and hard right now about what's in Libya's best interests.
For more on this, Taha Arvas joins us here in the studio. He's an adjunct finance professor at Bogazici University in Istanbul. Good to have you back on the program, Taha. Let's talk about OPEC Plus first, because they've decided to essentially stay the course by agreeing to just modest increases in output. We know that's despite some immense pressure from the likes of the United States and Europe to pump out more in the face of surging oil prices. Why do you think OPEC Plus has decided to simply, just continue its course of action? Is it a matter of wanting to just take advantage of these higher oil prices, or can they simply can't do it?
I think this is the maximum capacity. I think they're at maximum capacity. I don't think they would risk really opposing all these European countries, America, and the rest of the world who are in the midst of, we're about to start into a global recession. And so the last thing these countries need are higher oil prices. So OPEC is essentially saying, we're doing everything we can. And I think as we saw in the piece there with the French president, alluding to the fact that that's really what's going on. They're at maximum capacity now, it appears.
In terms of the issue of Russian oil, we know that the US and EU have been quite, I guess, adamant in the fact that they really want to phase out the purchase of Russian oil in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. But then we've got countries in other emerging economies, China, Sri Lanka, for example, going to Russia in order to meet its energy demands at a time when oil prices around the world are at near record highs. What do you make of this issue of Russian oil? Is it right that it's continuing to be sold in some parts of the world?
I don't really believe in, economics doesn't believe in the ability to stop supply and demand, right? Russian oil will be sold no matter what, somehow, just as Iranian oil has been sold through sanction busting, embargo busting, et cetera, through all this time. So the question is, how serious is the West, rather, to stop this? And can it stop it? Frankly, I think Europe is in a state where Europe doesn't really mind, or is trying to come up with ways to allow Russia to continue, especially natural gas and also crude oil, to continue to allow them to sell these products. And frankly, they are, both to India and China, because like I said, we're in the midst of this global recession, so we're about to jump into it, rather. And so I think they would be happy if there was some solution to this. Or alternatively, we're seeing the West cozy up to both Venezuela and Iran, who were just until yesterday persona non grata to the West. You know, what happened to Juan Guaido and Maduro, et cetera? Suddenly everything has changed because of these dynamics.
All this raises the question, why aren't we in a position where we're less reliant on fossil fuels such as oil? Does this transition need to be sped up?
Christian Lagarde was talking about that at the latest summit in Portugal a couple of days ago with Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, and saying how important it is to do that. Well, I've been hearing this, we've all been discussing this for many, many years now, almost a decade that I can recall. And so, yes, obviously this moving away from fossil fuels is a common target, but I guess it's easier said than done. And so it's going to take time for that to happen. In the meantime, we're still relying on fossil fuels.
We sure are. Taha Arvas, always a pleasure. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.